All right, we're learning the Sikha of the Rebbe from Chilek Aleph that talks about what we can learn from the fact that a kosher animal has to have split hooves and chew its cud. And what can we learn from that? I mean, we're not animals, are we? So the Rebbe says, oh, yes, we are. Every human being has animal tendencies. And included in these animal tendencies are also the lowest of the low, to be sometimes even worse than an animal. An animal usually does things for its own pleasure. A person could do things that are totally destructive and so incredibly selfish that it can be to the point where a person can even do things which don't benefit anybody, just in the name of his own selfishness. Oh, shalom. So here we have a lesson we can learn from the animals and from what it says in the Torah that an animal has to have a chew its cud and have split hooves. In general, there is by an animal a difference between the head and the foot. Okay, now the Rebbe wants to point out something over here also. We talked about this yesterday. A non-Jews are normal people, spiritual people, intelligent people, productive people. They can also be the opposite, could be. But a Jew has, in addition to this, he also has what's called a godly soul. A Jew has a drive to be a godly person, not necessarily a spiritual person, a spiritual person that comes from your natural soul. A Jew has, in addition to that, has a drive to be a godly person. A godly person means that he wants to learn the Torah, he wants to do the commandments, only because that's what God wants. He doesn't care if it even means giving his life. We see a lot of Jews gave their lives rather than their Judaism. They weren't willing to leave their Judaism in the time of the Crusades and the Inquisition. So we see that the Jews have a godly soul. Says the Rebbe, that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the godly soul. We're talking about the regular, natural animal soul. It's called an animal soul of a Jew, namely how he acts in the regular world, how he reacts to people, how he treats himself, how he treats others. It was natural, the day-to-day activities. Right, there's where the animal has to be kosher. This is where a person has to really be careful, because it's possible for a person to learn the Torah and to do the commandments and etc. and still be act like one of the worst animals, and it becomes even worse that he can justify it from the Torah. He can find something in the Torah to justify his anger and his lust and his dishonesty, and we see there's a lot of examples like that. Here we see there's the whole book of Psalms. The book of Psalms, right? King David, more than half of the Psalms, King David is praying to God to save him from his enemies. You know who King David's enemies were? King David's enemies, it wasn't the mafia or someone. These were Jews that knew the whole Torah. Doag, Achitophel, Shimi ben Gera. These people were Torah geniuses. And they were totally against King David. And they got most of the Jewish people to join with them. So we see that the Torah fixes a person up when a person learns it. A Jew learns the Torah, fixes them up 10%, 20%. And some people, it makes them worse when they learn the Torah, because then now they can find excuses for all things that even a normal human being would look at a non-Jew that doesn't have the Torah would say, what is this person doing? How can he act like this? So now this is very important for a Jew to learn from the animals. In this way, an animal can be better than us. How so? Here, let's see. In general, there is by an animal a difference between the head and the feet. Kop mit dem Regel with the foot. V, verstandig, like it's understood, also in the laws of Trefus and etc. If there's a hole in the brain, it's very bad. if it gets the foot cut off, especially the lower part, it's not forbidden to eat. The feet are not so important. For everybody knows, this is the head. Is oyster them, beside the fact which an animal is close to the earth in general, but his feet okay. Then in addition to the fact which by an animal, the the part which is closest to the earth is the foot. In other words, with the higher part of the animal is the animal. Also as the head is darfmen nit legen in gashmis in yanim artzim, nor mit the kochos from Maisa vifil memus. An animal, the lowest part of an animal are the feet. This tells us that number one, our animal soul has to be not totally on the ground. It has to be like an animal. Only the feet should touch. In other words, the lowest parts of our personality, that's what should be in the ground. You have a job, you have a store, so you should invest energy in the store only as much as you have to. Don't worry too much. Don't wake up too early. Don't stay too late. Don't let your store interfere with learning Torah, with doing commandments, etc. Only your feet, only the lower part. But Mender Tzelt, as the Rebbe, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, once said to one of his Hasidim, Velcher is given a tziur from a Baal Kishronos, one of his Hasidim that was very talented. But what? He decided to go into business and sell shoes. The Rebbe said to him that putting feet into shoes, boots, whatever, this I've heard about, I've seen. But for a person to put his head into the shoes, that I never saw. In other words, you have a business, don't sink your head into it. Okay, that's lesson number one. You have an animal has feet, only the feet touch the ground. But in addition, there's also another thing on the foot. Between the foot and the ground, there is a hoof. A hoof. The hoof separates even between the hoof and the ground. There's even between the foot and the ground, the leg and the ground, there is a hoof. This hoop, I'm sorry, I'm just because next door to me is playing music very loud, and I'm 1/10 listen to the music, and so it's hard a little bit to speak. Okay, and the foot, which is the whole thing of a foot, means is a parsa with an alef. The word parsa means to separate. A parsa means to pores, to separate. But it has to be, it's not enough the animal. If the animal's kosher, so the animal's kosher animal, it has to have a hoof, but the hoof has to be divided. Thus, this means that also the physical things that you do in your life have to be connected to godliness. You have to be able to see God even in the most physical things. So what do we have? Let's take this again, what the Rebbe is trying to say. We have okay, a person's head, his body, is not supposed to be involved in the physical things of the world only as much as necessary. Only the lower parts, like we say, a person has a business, be it only the lower parts. And also there has to be a separation, a hoof. A person has to separate between his devotion to God and the world. Says the Rebbe, yes, but not totally. Not totally. People have to be involved in the world, but not forgetting about God when they're in the world. Just one moment. All right, here we go. Let's go. Okay, so what is he saying? What's the Rebbe saying? The Rebbe is saying that when we deal with physical things in the world, and we must deal with physical things in the world, the Jew is here in order to fix up the world, but don't sink yourself in totally into the world. You have to maintain your mind and your heart for service of the creator of the universe. And only as much as is necessary should be invested in things in the world. Says the Rebbe, but that's not all. Also, there has to be a separation, a hoof between, in other words, there has to be a total separation between physical things in the world and spiritual things. But that's also not enough. This separation has to be split. What does it mean split? That even when you are occupied in the most physical, mundane things in the world, you always have to keep in mind the Creator, the Torah. What does God want? For instance, let's go a little further here. Like it says in the Tanya, that even in the things of the earth, you should not be separated from the oneness of God. In fact, that's the whole essence of a Jew. Goy echad ba'oretz. The Jewish people are supposed to, even in the most mundane things, to show that they are connected to God. For instance, you're in business to be totally honest, to be pleasant, to try to put a word of Torah, a positive word, be helpful to others, etc. As oich in inyanim from Welt, even in things of the world, that you should, which are separated, which seem, no, you should not be separated from God, the true oneness, right? Because you can think, listen, in making money, that's just like everybody else. Exactly the opposite. When it comes to making money, it's dog eat dog. I mean, you have to be the first one. You have to be the most clever. You have to outsmart everybody else. Yeah, that's what you can think. But the fact of the matter is it could be a big mistake. A person can get so much into beating the other person that he totally forgets about doing what God wants. If you rely on the Creator and do what the Creator wants, as you make a vessel for a blessing, and then the money that you do make, it could be that you don't make as much, but the money has a big blessing in it. I can give you a simple example. I used to have a Chabad house in a place called Or Yehuda. Immediately, as soon as I started the Chabad house, the taxi drivers, they all became very friendly with me. They became friendly. I used to use their services, but also we became very friendly. I invited them to my bar mitzvahs and things like that. Anyway, they all used to drive on Shabbat. Their taxi stand used to be open on Shabbat. Well, some other company decided to make it was a breakaway, whatever, and they made a competition. And this competition, one of the things that the competition has is that they said they did not drive on Shabbat. They didn't drive on Shabbat. They wanted the religious. There were more and more and more religious people that started to be in this town. So they said that they didn't drive on Shabbat. Good. So the guys that were with me, so none of them were religious. They were Iraqi Jews. None of them were religious. Maybe a little bit could be they kept kosher in the house, but except for that, absolutely nothing. So there's big arguments. Should we keep Shabbat? Shouldn't we keep Shabbat? So finally, they asked me what to do. I'm the rabbi. So I said, of course you should keep Shabbos. And, God creates the whole world. He provides for how many 7 billion people in the world. He can provide for you also. Don't worry about it. Keep the Shabbos. Oh, there was big arguments, but they really had no choice. And also they were losing customers to this other. So they advertised from now on, we're keeping Shabbos. They're keeping Shabbos. And the agreement was that anybody on their private, on their own, from their house, they could get calls, but the office was closed. Nobody called up, we're closed on Shabbos. So they could personally drive. They had to take the flag off, whatever that said, what is more, the Or Yehuda. Good. So they did it. No, first month, what happened? They earned less money. A taxi driver earns like 1/3 of his wages he earns on Shabbat, because people are available, and then they're driving. They go to the parties, wherever they go. So they stopped. No, what happens the first month? Everybody's complaining. Oh, we're all complaining. Instead of earning whatever it is, $3,000 a month, now they're only earning $2,000 a month, right? They work for 6 days of the week, and they make, right, the Shabbos, they don't. No, next month, what happens? Same thing. They're earning less money. But one of them says, well, should we open up if we open up the cab company? I mean, anyway, one of them says, listen, the fact of the matter is that I'm earning less money, but I finished the month, I have the exact same amount of debts. I've got the same amount of, maybe a little bit. The third month, they admitted that they were earning less money, and they had somehow or other more money in the bank. And they couldn't figure out what was going on. But all of them said they finished. Not only that, they had the big advantage. They sat with their family. At first, the family didn't want to be together. And then they invited everybody, and everybody, at least they would sit together. They would make kiddush. They would sit together a little bit, whatever it was. So what does it mean? It means that even when you're dealing in the most physical, mundane things, that you can't forget about God, because after all, the money comes from God. This is a very difficult lesson to learn, especially a person that's in, that really believes that, the more you work, the more money you make, right? And then not working is a sign of laziness. So you're a parasite, right? You don't work, you keep the Shabbos. That's terrible. Exactly the opposite. You are working, but you're working for the creator of the universe. Okay, like it says in the Tanya. What's then if a person, I'm sorry. Like it says in the Tanya, that also in physical things, a person should not be separated from the oneness of God. That even in mundane things, a person should always forget God, the truth, and therefore a person has to that's what it says, that there has to be split hooves. What does it mean, split? That even when he's on the earth, nevertheless, what's above goes all the way through into the earth, which then can a person make from an animal a pure animal, a permissible animal. This means that the physical animal should, what you need physically, you have to have, but even those physical things should be an animal. You're an animal, you have to eat, you have to drink, but it should be a permissible animal. And like it says in the book Kehelet Yaakov is a Kabbalistic book. He also wrote the book which is called Malei Haroim. It's also another sort of a Kabbalistic book. This is like a dictionary of Kabbalistic terms. As a behema is Rosh Tevis, behema is Basar Hayored Min Hashamayim. The animal soul can be flesh that comes from heaven. What does it mean? That this is a sign that it's certainly pure. Potentially, you have the potential that even the animal can be a permissible animal, because nothing impure comes from heaven. Another detail in this thing about splitting the hooves is, what is a hoof when it's split? It's split into two, right and left side. What does it mean? That when a person goes on the ground, is he has to have physical things, but it has to be in two different attitudes, right and left. The right is what love and making close, and the left is pushing away. What's this mean? There are certain people that by them is all they do is they want to be nice, friendly, get along with everybody, no problems, without any, restraints. They say is in order, if you want to make a good impression on another Jew, you want to bring him close to Torah, so therefore you have to Therefore, you have to present to him things in a pleasant way of the Torah, which even means to change the Torah a little bit according to the spirit of the time. It used to be when I was young, the classic example was to use a microphone in synagogue. Some of the synagogues, the Orthodox synagogues, they always had, 50 people, 100 people. The conservative reform had 500, 1,000 people, huge, big, massive, expensive, architecturally beautiful places, but there were so many people there. How could you talk to all of them at one time? So you had to have a microphone, obviously a microphone. But the thing is, a microphone is forbidden. It's forbidden to use a microphone on Shabbat, according to all opinions, all normal opinions. There's no opinion in the world that says that it's permissible to use a microphone on Shabbat, even if you turn it on before Shabbat. It's forbidden. But on the other hand, how is everybody going to hear? And of course, the rabbi is presenting them with a message which will inspire them and bring them closer to the Lord and everything. It doesn't make any difference what you say. You can't do it. It's forbidden to do. But on the other hand, you say, but I'm making people close. If there's no microphone, nobody's going to come to the synagogue. What's going to be? Okay, the fact that they come to synagogue by means of driving, that's a bigger problem. But let's not talk about that. At least when they drive to synagogue, the rabbi is not doing it. Here, the rabbi is standing in front of everybody. And he personally is activating this thing. It's like turning on and off the lights. On Shabbat, you're not allowed to do that. And this thing that if you want to bring Jews close to Judaism and to Torah, is really true. It's a good thing. But we've talked about this before, that means love the creations. It says that Aaron, you should be a pupil of Aaron. And Pirkei Avot, it says, be a pupil of Aaron and bring them closer to the Torah. You have to bring them to the Torah, change them so that they themselves will accept the Torah as it is. You don't have to give them the whole Torah at one time, right? You give a little bit here, a little bit there, but don't say that's it, that's all. Right? You don't have to do any more. You say you want to put on tefillin, you don't put on tefillin, put on tefillin once a month. Put on tefillin once a month. A Jew is supposed to put on every day, but maybe that's too much for you right now. Do it once a month. You can. Then after that, do it once a week. Put on tefillin, you'll see it's good, right? And after that, you can put on tefillin. You forgot one day. It's not so bad. Don't forget again, though. You shouldn't do it. In other words, to present the person with a positive attitude of the whole Torah. That even di v'zayin nit mer v'abriya ba'alma. It says that you're supposed to make the creations come close. In other words, those people that have no other good quality except for the fact that God just created them. They have absolutely, some people even more. It's only God can create a person like that, right? That he's a liar, a cheater, whatever it is. Nevertheless, you have to make them, try to bring them closer to the Torah. But this, what a person says, that in order to that, maybe I have to fix up the Torah a little bit, right? Give them a permission to drive on Shabbat, which really, this is just wrecks the Torah up. It means that they're accepting not the Torah, they're accepting something else. This is not really the Torah. The Torah says that you have to, right? You have to eat kosher food. You can't tell a person don't eat kosher food. That's okay because let everybody eat what they want to. So in fact they say that was the famous thing in America. There used to be there didn't used to be a thing with conservative Judaism. Conservative Judaism, it started off when the reform, so they wanted to just reform all of Judaism. They said that the Torah is just old-fashioned, we can change everything. And they made a big sort of a party, I think it was the Pittsburgh platform or something like that. And they served not kosher food there. They served like clams or whatever it was. And there were a lot of Jews that came there that they agreed with this, free spirit, but they said that's just too much. And from that was formed conservative Judaism. In other words, we got to conserve something. We have to preserve something. Okay, I don't know really which is better or which is worse, right? The fact of the matter is that, there's a law that says that you're not supposed to have a not kosher mezuzah on your door. It's better to have no mezuzah at all than a mezuzah that's not kosher. It's better not to have a mezuzah at all. No house there, no parchment inside. It's better to have absolutely nothing than to have a mezuzah that's there, but it's not kosher mezuzah. One letter is wiped out. Why not? Why not? It's a thing. You go in, you at least you remember God. He says no, because if you have a not kosher mezuzah on your door, you'll think that that's enough, and you'll never put a kosher one on. But if you have no mezuzah at all, then you'll start to feel bad a little bit. You'll start to feel bad. So it's the same thing. Which is worse, to throw the whole Torah away or to say I'm going to keep half of the Torah? I don't know. Is it half of the Torah? For sure, both of them are no good. But at least if a person doesn't keep the Torah at all, he can think to himself, wow, I'm not doing at all what God wants. I should do. If a person's keeping half of the Torah, whatever, he says, I'm doing okay. I'm all right. Says the Rebbe, this is a very destructive attitude. You cannot have, when the hoof is split, it just can't be just only on the right side. It has to be right and left. You have to be kind, nice, pleasant, loving. They say forgiving. Yeah, all these things, right. But you also have to have a little bit of severity also. The Torah has to be the Torah. Thus is the because this comes out to be the opposite of the Torah. Like it says in the language of the Mishnah, Mekarvim the Torah, you have to bring people to the Torah and not to bring the Torah to them, because that is not even the Torah. So that's another thing to learn. The hoof has to be split right side and left side. Even if a person says, 1 second, by means of this, I'm actually exposing Jews to the Torah. But a person has, but I'm being lenient. You have to know that according to the law of the Torah, you cannot allow to change even one letter of the Torah. And this is a law from whether it's a law from the Torah, whether it's a law from the rabbis, and even those people the rabbis say that even the laws that the rabbis established in the last generations. Somebody can say, 1 second, how did the rabbis change? Here we see the rabbis made all these new laws. And first of all, the rabbis' laws that they made were never to be more lenient. The laws that the rabbis made were always to be more severe. There are certain cases where, okay, but not important. The rabbis made laws, 99.99% of the laws are to be more severe, number one. Number two, the rabbis are commanded to change the laws. And these are rabbis that are very serious about the Torah and very God-fearing people. They're not just doing it because it's easier. Okay, he says there's one exception. If you have a true prophet like Elijah the prophet, that he made a sacrifice outside of the temple, but it was a temporary thing that only one time he did it, and it had to be a true prophet. It can't be just somebody that stands up and says, let's make Judaism easier. Says the fact of the matter is that if you really if you try to change the Torah to make it more easy and accessible, that you really don't really bring Jews close to the Torah. Exactly the opposite. You make things much worse. You make it wird allein eingeschlungen in ze bis men kehrt ab chas v'shalom legamri. It means that it makes a person weaker in the Torah. If you know that the rabbi says, listen, you don't have to take this law seriously, so then they'll say we don't have to take anything seriously. Then you'll come to hate the rabbis. That was basically what happened with Christianity. It was Christianity. They said every word of the Torah is true, but we don't do any commandments. We're going to translate, we're going to interpret it however we want to, right? However we want to, whatever idea comes up in our mind, we're going to do it, and we see what came from that. Like it says in when a person finds himself lost in says, but how does it work? if a person, for instance, finds himself lost in the middle of a forest, and there's all sorts of wild animals, well, it doesn't happen all of a sudden he walks out of his house one morning and he finds himself lost in a forest. No, little by little, he drives in his car, he takes the wrong turn, he goes somewhere. Little by little, all of a sudden, he finds himself lost. And that's what happens. A person starts to be lenient in the Torah. He drops this and he finds, hey, it feels good. He drops another thing. One day he doesn't pray. Another day doesn't put on tefillin one day. Finally doesn't put on tefillin at all. And finally, there's no, and the Torah is whatever is for him. He's not for the Torah. He doesn't have to sacrifice anything. And that's the opposite of what the Creator wants from us. This of Mafris Parsa is not enough. That a person has to have in his worldly things, it has to be split so that he feels godliness. And also it has to be to the right and to the left. It has to be kindness, but there also has to be severity and exactness and doing exactly what it says in the Torah, what it says in the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch, this is a very important term that you'll learn in Judaism, is the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, there's even a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch that tells you what the laws of a genuine, God-fearing Jew should do. This is not just what you Jew should do. This is what God wants. This is what God wants from us. He's the Creator. And if it contradicts what God wants, between what God wants and what you want, so that's what Judaism says. You have to do what God wants. That's the left side, the split hoof. But this is not enough. There also has to be chewing the cud. What's chewing the cud? It means that, what is chewing the cud? The animal eats the food and then afterwards regurgitates it and chews it again. This means every physical thing that a person does, a person has to re-chew it, clarify once, twice. Is this really Erzal Dastan, whether you should do it or whether not to do it? To be spontaneous is very, very good. Once you know that you're right, once you're sure that what you're doing is correct, then spontaneity and flowing is an essential thing in life. To be afraid of nothing, to be afraid of what people think, to be afraid of this is not necessarily a good thing. This could be a very, very bad thing. A person could get paranoid, think about nothing. But on the other hand, to be afraid that maybe I'm doing what God doesn't want me to, this is very important thing. What are you supposed to do? Go and ask a rabbi. Go and ask somebody. Don't just sit on your own and think, right? Maybe it's wrong. We used to, when we were kids, we walked home, step on a crack, you break your mother's back. They used to, in the sidewalk used to be divided. There used to be lines that divided the sidewalk. They used to put the cement down in blocks. So he used to say, if you step on a crack, you break it. So people used to be very careful not to step on a crack. It's ridiculous, right? Paranoia. People are afraid they have to go and lock their door 50 times. Did I lock it? Did I not lock it? Okay, that's already called an obsession. That's not good. And Judaism can certainly become an obsession. Certainly, no doubt about it. People can become obsessed, compulsive, right? They have to do these laws. They have to do this laws. So Judaism is supposed to be a happy thing. It's supposed to be a thing that flows. Why? Because you know that you're right. When you know 100% that what you're doing is right, then it's good. But you have to try to find out that you're right. It doesn't mean you have to always be worried about thinking that you're doing something wrong. And this is a very delicate thing, very delicate. But nevertheless, it is essential. That's why there's rabbis. That's why you have friends. That's why you have the advisors to ask, is this permissible? Is it not permissible? You have a question, look in the Shulchan Aruch, ask a rabbi if you've interpreted it properly. But once you do, then go for it. If you're sure that's true, like it says, you have to know what to do and what not to do. That's what it means, chewing your cud. According to Chassidut, this is all these means, this is what's called birur ban and birur ma. This is already a Kabbalistic idea, means that we have to refine things in the world and re-refine them and refine them again, so that we have to know that we are doing the right thing and that not only we're doing the right thing, but we're also doing it in the right way. A person can eat kosher food, but he can eat the kosher food like a pig, right? He himself eats like an animal. So you have to refine things and re-refine things and re-refine things to find out that you're really doing the right thing. That's what it means chewing your cud, right? Don't just say there's this sign they have, right? Just do it. Just do it. True. Once you know that what you're doing is right and you've clarified to find out that your actions and your speech and even your thoughts are correct, then for sure do it. But if not, don't do it. Tess, I know there's okay. There's another thing we can also learn from the signs of Torah by a bird. A bird. A bird, it's not exactly clear which birds are kosher and which birds are not. It doesn't say in the Torah. Remember, we learned last week, the signs of a bird are not so clear. The sign is that we cannot rely on the signs that are there alone. It has to be what's called by Masorah. We talked about this when we talked about the laws. It has to be something that was given over to us from the previous generations. It has to be given to the what is this bird permissible to eat, right? You want to know, is a quail, a pheasant, is it permissible to eat? A peacock, can you eat a peacock? What about an ostrich? What about, are you allowed to eat these things? No, maybe yes, maybe not. Let's see. I don't know. What are the signs, right? So he says you have to ask a rabbi that received from a rabbi, and he received from a rabbi. Judaism has been going on, for 3,300 years. There's always been these breakaway groups and rebellious groups and lenient groups, and there's the Tzedukim, and there's the Baitusim, and there's the Shomronim, there's the Zionists, and there's the Christians, and there's all these breakaway groups trying to redefine Judaism. But still, despite all the enemies that we have from outside and from inside, despite all of this, Judaism still has this line of rabbis that were serious about Judaism and that they have kept the idea of what Judaism is. And this has been accepted by, hundreds of thousands of Jews every generation, if it's not the majority of the Jews, but it certainly is a very, very powerful minority of Jews. And even though within these Jews, there's all these arguments and everything, but nevertheless, it still has remained what's called the Masoret. What's been given over, is this bird kosher or is it not kosher? So let's say, for instance, you have a Jew that's non-religious, and you ask him, is this bird kosher? He says, of course it's kosher. What's the question? What is it, a hawk? Yeah, sure. But then you think maybe not. You'll go and ask another, is this, till you find one rabbi says, what are you talking about? This is totally forbidden. And he's more believable than the others. You see, he's more serious. That's what's called Masorah. And Plug, to leave us, why do we have to have a Masorah? Why do you have to have it given down from other people? Why? You already have the signs. The signs are there. If the signs are there, so eat the animal. What's the problem? He says, no, because you can't rely on yourself. He says you can learn the Shulchan Aruch and even go according to your own intelligence. And you can be according to what you think is being very, very strict on yourself. But nevertheless, a person through this can reach the lowest and lowest levels. God forbid. There has to be a Masorah. And like I said, you can take the example from the enemies of King David. These people knew the whole entire Torah. They knew everything, right? And nevertheless, they hated King David. How did they find the permission to themselves? How did they find? He said, because they weren't really serious in deepening themselves in and finding somebody that could find a negative opinion, right? A severe opinion, which this comes from the language of Masira, means Masira, and giving yourself over and attaching yourself to the rabbi and a rav, and it has to be a rabbi which has worked in the Torah, and this will save the Jewish people. This was what will save the Jewish people. And also it has to be a rabbi that he is an expert in them One second. Excuse me. I skipped something. Excuse me. Here. Oh. It has to be himself, which is a rabbi. It has to be, you have to ask from a rabbi, which himself is occupying himself in helping Jewish people, saving Jewish people, and also a rabbi that's an expert in the Jews and in all the laws of Judaism, and he is an expert to save you from the advice of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil impulse. In other words, you have to have split hooves. Split hooves means that you have to bring godliness even into the lowest physical things in the world. Simultaneously, it has to be to the right and to the left. You have to be sometimes very severe with yourself. And last of all, it has to be with the advice of other people. Don't take things on yourself and make your own decisions. By means of this, you will be a kosher animal. Now let's just do the second. What do I get out of this? Here we go. Hayom Yom. Today is Hayom Yom. The Shabbos will be Shabbos Mavorchim, by the way. The Shabbos that we bless the month of Iyar. It says if a person does something that's permissible to do, kosher food, whatever, but if you do it purely for your own pleasure, this can be totally evil, total bad. Like the rabbi says in the Tanya, in the 7th chapter, because we have a commandment. Kadesh atzmecha b'mutar. You have to sanctify yourself even in permissible things. You have to put holiness even into the matters that are holy. That's what we just finished learning, right? Even in the physical things you do in the world, the hoof has to be split. You have to bring godliness even into the permissible things, so that they serve the purpose of improving or enabling you to learn Torah, to commit the commandments, the fear of God, and having good character traits. In other words, like I said, you can eat kosher food, but you can eat it in a not kosher way. I'll just say one more thing. There's a story that says that the Baal Shem Tov once took his pupils out for a walk on Shabbat, and they looked in the window of it was the Jewish area, and they looked in the window and they saw that there was a tzaddik, it says, that's the language, sitting and eating cholent, right? And he had a big strymelion, one of these fur hats on his head, and in front of their eyes, he turned into an ox. They saw an ox sitting there with a big fur hat and dressed in Shabbos garments, and he was with his family sitting around him, and he had a whole face of an ox, a long nose of it, like that. And the pupils were astounded. And the Baal Shem Tov said, he's so interested, so sunk in eating the meat of the ox that he has actually become an ox. They saw spiritually that he had actually become an ox. It manifested itself physically. In other words, a person has to eat the food, and not that the food eats him, right? A person has to, like somebody said, is it okay if a religious Jew owns a Ferrari? I said, it's okay if a Jew owns a Ferrari, but the Ferrari shouldn't own you. Usually a person has a car like that, he thinks about it all the time and he polishes it, and it costs like $10,000 a month or something to get the oil changed. There's all these crazy things. The car owns you. If you need a car like that, because people see you have a Ferrari, and then they'll listen to what you say. You can impress people in the jet set or whatever it is. You can impress people in order that they'll do Torah and commandments. Also, they'll listen to a message about being Jewish, about being a normal person. then then it's all right. But you can't fool yourself. Very important principle in Judaism. Don't fool yourself. That's why you have to chew your cud, so that you don't chew yourself. God bless you. Have a good Shabbat, and we'll see each other on Yom Rishon. We'll learn Likuti Torah, beautiful memorim about Metzora and about Isha Ki Tazria. We'll learn about that, God willing, on Yom Rishon, 8:15. Thank you. Have a good Shabbat.